So I want to welcome you to a very special talk. We are so lucky to have someone who can bring the outdoors to us without the heat. So we have Ellen Glovsky, who knows Fairchild Gardens inside and out, and she's here to tell us all the secrets and all the wonderful things that we are missing by not visiting Fairchild. So hopefully we will be encouraged to go and purchase our tickets and go visit this wonderful gem that we have here in Miami.
Thank you, Roxy. I thought it was a great idea to have Ellen when she reached out and told us that she volunteers at Fairchild. I think she told me since before the pandemic, and then had to take a 2-year break when they closed during the pandemic. Information that we give you, the presentations that we give you, have more to do with animals, and that's just because that's kind of more my forte. I think it's a great idea to include plants. I mean, obviously that's a huge part of the biodiversity that you have here in Florida, and so that's what she's going to be talking about today. Also, I'm so jealous that you guys are getting therapy dogs next week, and I might have to come by. I bring my dog to work almost every day, and I can't imagine like not having her around. I mean, she's not there today because reasons, but but almost every day. It's definitely, it makes a huge difference in my day. So I can imagine how fun next week is going to be for you guys. So anyway, with that, I'm just going to go ahead and hand it over to Ellen and let her get started.
Well, hello everyone. I'm quite pleased to be here talking about one of my favorite things. It's a very rich place, full of really interesting things, I think. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history. So these are the things that the garden wants me as a volunteer to share on all my tours. So the garden was founded in 1935. It is 83 acres that was purchased by Colonel Robert Montgomery, who was a wealthy gentleman from the northeast of the US who wanted a place to grow his favorite plants, cycads and palms. So when he retired, he purchased 83 acres in Coral Gables and picked South Florida because it's the only place where those plants can grow outdoors year-round. We have the only subtropical climate in the country. So he bought 83 acres, but you can imagine how rural it was here in 1935. No air conditioning, no infrastructure, no roads, really. So it was a very rural place. He got together with Charles Crandon and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, two people you probably know, and some other influential people because they were in such an out-of-the-way place that they needed a way to publicize that this garden existed and that it was going to be open to the public. So they named it for Dr. Fairchild because he was well known. He was an economic botanist. So a botanist is someone who knows about plants, and an economic botanist is someone who wants to use plants to improve the economy. So his job with the US Department of Agriculture was going around the world and finding plants that would do well in the US to improve farmers' businesses and to improve the diet of Americans. In the 1930s, our diet was brown and beige and white and no color because if you didn't grow it in your own yard, you didn't get to eat it. There were no trucks carrying strawberries across the country, right? So he went around looking for plants that would do well, that would improve the diet of Americans. So he worked for the USDA for 37 years, and he brought back 30,000 plus plants. Many of them didn't work, but some of them worked spectacularly well and really changed things in our country. So he brought back nectarines and dates and sweet potatoes, chickpeas, cauliflower, avocado, mango, papaya, seedless grapes, alfalfa, which is used as animal feed. None of these plants grew here before he brought them and established them here. Also, the cherry trees that are blooming on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. They came from Japan, but through Dr. Fairchild. It was through his efforts that they got here. So the garden was designed by William Lyman Phillips, who was a very well-known landscape architect at the time. He worked with the group that designed Central Park in New York. Thank you. Franklin Olmsted, yes. I just blanked on that. And the Emerald Necklace that surrounds Boston. It's a series of parks around Boston. So he was part of the group, the company of landscape architects that designed those other parks. The design is essentially the same as it was. Of course, the plants are different, but the basic layout is as it was, and it's really beautiful and so thoughtfully designed. You can imagine how many times I've driven around on all the tours I've given, and each time I do, I see some other little really interesting quirk about the design that just makes me stop and say, wow, how could someone think of that? William Lyman Phillips established an architectural style that remains. So the building on the top there is the original gatehouse. So they had a night watchman because we were in a very rural area. And they built a house for that person to live in. And that's where the original gate to the garden was. And you can see the original style a little better. This is a newer building. This is the Rose and McQuillan Art Center. So the style is white limestone posts, white shutters, a very Caribbean look. So the first building was the one on the top, which is no longer white limestone. As it ages, it changes color. But all of the buildings on the property have at least some elements of this architectural style to give it a cohesive feel, and it really does work. The original gate, which was at the gatehouse on the top picture, so when you walked through the gate, that's the view that you saw that extends to the other side of the property. So when I'm driving the tours, we stop here and look across to the other side. We call that a sight line. So they created a series of long views. So you turn the corner and you see way off into the distance with the lakes, and it was designed specifically to give it that wow feeling when you walked into the gate. They call this the Grande Allée, which means shaded walkway in French. You give it a little, a little extra. So beyond that, my favorite things as I drive the tours, there I am, in this is the Fairchild uniform that you're supposed to wear. It's really fun, actually. Some of the plants in Fairchild we have here on Key Biscayne, if you're paying attention, and obviously I am. So on the left here we have a rainbow eucalyptus. We have one of these in the library park here on Key Biscayne. So it gets its colors because as the bark peels, the oils in the tree oxidize when they're exposed to the air. So they start out green. You see some green here. It's sort of a neon green when it first peels, and then over time it changes to red, orange, blue, pink, purple. Every time you look at the tree, I come once a week, it looks different because the bark has peeled. It's really quite a beautiful tree. There is a shrub there called the flame of Jamaica, or Jamaica poinsettia. It's related to the poinsettia we have here in holiday time in the US. So these shrubs cover the hills in Jamaica, and when they're all red, it looks like a flame of Jamaica. So the red is not actually a flower. It's a bract or an adapted leaf. The flowers are actually the little yellow structures that you see there. I got you a close-up of the flower. It's a really interesting shrub. These are just my favorites, and then I'm going to tell you in a little more order. But this angel's trumpet, we have them in white and in pink. They're beautiful, but they're very poisonous. They have a sticky resin that is poisonous to humans and to animals. So in Fairchild, they keep the tree trimmed so the blossoms are out of reach because they're beautiful. You'll see them around in people's yards sometimes, but you have to be really careful because they are actually poisonous. We have heliconia. We have a lot of those on the island. Yeah.
Sorry, just a quick question. With the angel's trumpet, is it just the flower that's poisonous?
Yes. The flower has a sticky resin on it. Yeah.
So the leaves are fine, though, if you were to touch the leaves.
As far as I know, but please don't touch them, okay? The focus of attention when you talk about this plant is on the flowers, partly because they're so showy, and partly because they're poisonous. Right? Yeah.
So what happens to you when you touch them?
I don't know exactly. I don't know. I don't know. You know, my job as a tram driver is to say, please don't touch the flowers. That's about it. I'd have to look it up. Many different varieties of heliconia. They're upright. They grow down like this one. We have them all over South Florida. They're actually quite beautiful, and they're beautiful in tropical flower arrangements. I'm sure you've seen them because of the shape, and the color is so unusual. This is a shrub called Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. We have it around on the island. It's one color the first day, it changes color on the second day, and another color on the third day. I love blue flowers, so it's one of my favorite shrubs. And on the vine pergola, which I'll tell you about in a moment, we have this blue sky vine, which is related to morning glories, and they're quite beautiful. The gardeners at Fairchild don't like them because they're invasive. They take over, and the gardeners are always trying to trim them back to keep them from taking over. I love them. So another favorite of mine is this talipot palm. It's one of the biggest palms in the world. We have a beautiful specimen at Fairchild. That's a picture of it there on your right. At the end of the tree's life, 50 or 60 years, it grows one huge stalk with millions of flowers and fruit, which turn into seeds, and it dies. So it blooms once, and the whole tree dies. This is our talipot palm at Fairchild. The picture of the flowering is not our tree because it hasn't matured yet. It's another picture that I found, but it's a really interesting tree. I love this tree. I just think this tree is beautiful. It's called a money tree. They sell them as very small potted plants, but when it grows up, this is what it looks like. This just drew my attention when I first came to Fairchild because the base of it is so beautiful. And the flower, I took that picture. I just love. We have a series of flowers in tropical plants here in South Florida that have that bottle brush look. There are a number of them. This one, because it has the extra petals, I think it's beautiful. I stood there and looked at it for about 10 minutes before I took the picture. So we have a beautiful vine pergola, which is 560 feet long. It runs parallel to Old Cutler Road, which is the street you come in to Fairchild with. It is the original design from the garden, from William Lyman Phillips. The posts are limestone that was quarried in Merry Christmas Park in Coconut Grove. The wood along the top has been changed many times. It gets wrecked from hurricanes, and it keeps they replace it. But the posts are the original. They have stood. There's always something blooming on the pergola. It's a beautiful walk along parallel to Old Cutler, especially on a hot day. It's shaded, it smells nice, it's quite beautiful. We have a Victoria Amazonica water lily pool, which is opposite the vine pergola. The Victoria Amazonica water lilies don't grow here in the winter. They get planted in the spring, and because it's not warm enough in the winter for them here. But when they are mature, they look like, on the right, top there. They can grow up to 3 feet wide and basically crowd out everything else in the pond because they cover the surface. They have a lip. You can see it looks like a saucer. And they have spines underneath the water lily pad to keep animals from eating it. So they're really aggressive plants. It's hard to think of plants as being aggressive, but this one sort of is. It has a beautiful bloom. Looks like that. It's one of the biggest blooms in the water lily family. The flower opens one night and is white. attracts a very specific beetle called a scarab beetle. The flower closes during the night, trapping the beetle. The next day, the flower opens a different color, pink, and the beetle escapes and takes the pollen to the next flower. It's this really interesting life cycle. Yeah, it's, if you're interested, David Attenborough has some clips on YouTube. If you Google Victoria Amazonica, David Attenborough, and he has a video of it happening. It's really pretty amazing. So we have two different baobabs. We have baobabs here on our island. I don't know if people are not familiar. I walk a lot with my dog, so I'm looking at what's growing in our neighborhood here. This one's on the village green. I'm going to play you a short video here where it's along Crandon at the village green. And the village green, right. If you walk along Crandon, it's there. Look for the wide base, and the tree is mostly trunk and branches with a few leaves at the top. It's a very distinctive tree. It's a really interesting tree. Let me play you this video.
This spectacular tree behind me is an African baobab tree, Adansonia digitata. It was planted by David Fairchild in 1939, the year after the garden opened. In all those years, it's grown to be 28 feet in circumference, 28 feet around, and 50 feet tall. This species can get to be actually over 100 feet in circumference. There's a specimen in South Africa that's that enormous. This kind of tree can live to be over 2,000 years old. It can actually become the oldest flowering tree in the world. There are some other trees that get older, like the redwoods, but they're conifers. So it's one of the world's most iconic and amazing trees, and it's thriving here at Fairchild.
Okay. We have two baobabs at Fairchild. That's the oldest one that he's describing, and there's one that's much younger. And you can tell because it's smaller in circumference. So there's a whole story about baobabs, but I'm not going to have time to tell you, maybe another time. Live oaks are very common in the southeast of the US. What I love about them is because of the vertical grooves in the bark, seeds are carried by the wind and animals and insects and take root in the vertical grooves of the bark. And they are air plants or epiphytes. An epiphyte is something that grows on something else. It doesn't harm the tree. And it becomes a community of plants. We have 2 or 3 live oaks at Fairchild that are just stunning, like spectacular, with plants growing in them. That there were orchids and bromeliads and many other kinds of plants growing on the tree. So these fluffy green, they're green here, along the branches of the tree are called resurrection ferns. When there's no rain, they turn brown and shrivel up and look dead. And the minute it rains, you can stand there and watch them turn green, sort of neon green. If you're willing to stand in the rain, you can watch them turn green, and you can tell how long it's been since it rained by how brown they are, how dead they look. So in this picture, they're quite alive. It's rained recently. So they grow on many of the live oaks. They grow on many live oaks all over South Florida. In my opinion, Fairchild has some of the most beautiful ones. So we have Spanish moss growing here all around the island. It's not Spanish and it's not a moss. It's actually an epiphyte growing on another plant that is a bromeliad, which is a group of plants that are related to pineapples. They also have a lot of insects that live in the fronds of the plant. They used to use them as bedding, the Spanish moss as bedding, so that expression, don't let the bed bugs bite. Yeah, we don't do that anymore. But they're beautiful. So then there are 3 arid beds in the garden, all of which are built up with sand under them. We get about 50 inches of rain here in Miami, and these plants need about 10. So the sand allows the water to drain. This one bed we call the spiny forest of Madagascar. Madagascar is an island off the southeast coast of Africa. These plants have been brought here because many of them are endangered, because of climate change and because humans are taking over the land. And when we say we clear the land, think about what that means. It means you're destroying what's there, what's natural. This is my editorial comment. This is not Fairchild, this is Ellen. We put these euphemisms like clearing the land. You're cutting down something that is naturally there. So a part of the spiny forest of Madagascar is endangered. So Fairchild has brought a number of those plants here. We have a threefold mission: conservation, research, and education. So this is education. We want people to know about this. And this is conservation. So among the many plants in this bed, this one is called a mousetrap plant. It has sticky fibers along the flower, and mice and other small animals can get caught in it, so that's what it's called. It's one of the few blooming plants in the arid beds. Plants have adapted in different ways to very low water conditions and very hot and dry conditions. One of the ways they adapt is by growing very many small leaves instead of large ones. If you're looking to conserve water and you have large leaves, you have more surface area from which to lose water. So instead, they adapted by growing very small leaves. If you look at the picture on the top and the one in the middle, and this one here also, many small leaves, many thorns to keep the animals from eating the leaves because they're looking for water too. So this one, I took a picture of it a few weeks ago. It now has a few leaves, just as many leaves as it needs, just as much chlorophyll as it needs to get enough energy, and the rest of it is thorns to keep the animals away from the leaves, and that one grows small yellow flowers. So some of the thorns are really rather formidable, is the word I use. Can't see them very well here. I was a little disappointed in my picture. But there are some that have thorns that are 2 or 3 inches long with very small leaves in among the thorns. So you really wouldn't want to tangle with that tree to try to get those leaves. So what interests me the most about this bed is the many different ways the plants have adapted to these very dry conditions and can flourish. So we have the Liberty Hyde Bailey Palm Glade. This is the formal area of the garden. Actually, I'm going to this is the executive director of the garden.
This is the Liberty Hyde Bailey Palm Glade here at Fairchild. And a glade is an open area surrounded by forests, surrounded by woods. And right behind us we have this beautiful view of Glade Lake and Royal Palm Lake. Now this feature was named by David Fairchild in honor of his friend Liberty Hyde Bailey. Bailey was one of the greatest horticulturists of all time. He did more than anybody to advance the science of growing plants here in the United States. And David Fairchild decided that this would be a great feature to name in his honor. Fairchild asked the landscape architect, William Lyman Phillips, to develop this feature. Didn't give him a lot of guidance because there had never been a palm glade developed anywhere else in the world. And it's such a breathtaking view that this has become a very popular place for weddings. And in fact, I was married here at Fairchild in this spot. People come back here to celebrate their anniversaries and they bring their families back here for reunions. This is a very meaningful location here within the garden.
And people do photo shoots here, any place where you'd want that beautiful backdrop for your pictures. So the next, along my tour, we have a wonderful rainforest in Fairchild. It is the largest outdoor rainforest in the US. It meets our mission of conservation and education. We want people to understand what the rainforest is, why it's important, and why it's endangered, and why that's a problem that it's endangered. So rainforests are the lungs of the earth. So humans take in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. Plants do the opposite. So plants are taking in CO2 and helping us with climate change. The rainforest, being a very dense growth, absorbs a huge amount of carbon. So that's why it's called the lungs of the earth. In many parts of the world, people are clearing the land. that expression again, to farm, to graze livestock, and they're ripping apart this very important basic ecological area of the planet. So we want people to know what a rainforest looks like. There are paths, paved paths in among the rainforest where you can walk through and really get a feeling of what the rainforest is like. It's shocking when you walk or drive through, you're in this open area of the Palm Glade, and then suddenly you're in a rainforest, which is closed in and darker, immediately cooler, constantly misted. They have misting tubes on almost every tree because these plants need up to 100 inches of water per year, and we get about 50 in Miami. So they're constantly being watered. The rainforest is being destroyed at an alarming rate. I urge you to come and take a look. We have beautiful orchid displays in the rainforest. Part of them are installed for the Orchid Festival, which was a couple of months ago at Fairchild, and of course they remain. They're just stunning. So I want to tell you a little more about orchids. These are all pictures I took of orchids in the garden. It is the home of the National Orchid Garden, the American Orchid Society, and the American Orchid Society Library collection. It's one of the largest collection of orchids in the world. It includes some of the rarest species on the planet. I'll show you a few others. We have a Million Orchid Project, which is, I think, a very interesting project. It's the largest outreach program dedicated to orchid conservation ever. South Florida was once full of wild orchids before the railroad came to Florida and bringing with it masses of people who thought the orchids were fabulous and took them for their own property or to sell. And pretty soon, the wild orchids were all but gone. And I guess I don't have to tell you how I feel about that. So the Million Orchid Project the goal is to restore 1 million orchids to the public spaces in South Florida. So there are collaborations with schools, with church groups, with community groups. Most of the projects that Fairchild does have an outreach component to them. We're not only trying to conserve a plant, for example, but we're trying to draw the community in to caring about plants and to knowing how to take care of them and how to bring back what we've lost, such as many of the wild orchid species. So that they have a bus that they propagate seeds of rare native orchids on the bus, and it goes around to schools for children to learn about what's going on with plants. It's unique in scale, focus on public spaces, and involvement of the local community. So I didn't have space on the other slides for more orchids, so I made another slide. Fairchild sells native orchid plants. They sell a kit. This is one of them here. They will help you learn how to plant them and take care of them. And there is a lot of research going on at Fairchild in many, many different areas. And one of them is conservation of orchids, particularly the ones that are endangered, because that's a big part of our mission. So you can go to fairchildgarden.org and see what's for sale there, or go over and meet them. So cycads, I mentioned that Montgomery, who founded the garden, was interested in cycads and palms, two different categories of plants, two different types of plants. So cycads look a little bit like a palm. If you look at the top left picture, they have a similar frond. It's not called a branch or a leaf, it's called a frond. But if you touch a cycad, it's sort of spiky and leathery, whereas a palm is smoother and softer. It's a completely different plant, but people confuse them. So they are living fossils in that they were here up to 1 million years before the dinosaurs. So they've been around for a really long time on our planet. Reproduce with male and female cones that get crossed via the wind, birds, insects. There are about 315 species in the world. Many are at Fairchild. Again, our mission of conservation. So the kunti, and I'll tell you more about that in a little second, it's a very small cycad. It's the only one that's native to South Florida. The rest have all been brought here. So the kunti, its roots are poisonous. The Miccosukee and the other indigenous people learned that the roots were poisonous, but if you pounded them and washed them repeatedly, you could get rid of the poison, and then you could grind the roots, dry it and grind it, and you may have heard of arrowroot biscuits or zwieback. Yeah, I'm probably talking to people who had kids when zwieback was popular. It's made from arrowroot. It's made from this plant. So because this plant is poisonous, many insects won't go to it because it's poisonous. But one butterfly in particular, the Atala butterfly, has a relationship with the kunti. It turns red because it's consuming the poison. It doesn't harm the insect, but it signals predators that, hey, wait a minute, I'm poisonous. So the Atala butterfly is endangered because we have destroyed much of the habitat of the kunti, particularly in the Pine Rockland area, which I'll tell you about in a minute. I'll show you the cones. The orange are the cones, and you can see one growing down on that one. The cones are really interesting, all different shapes and sizes and colors. Cycads come in every imaginable shape and size. They have a trunk, they have no trunk, they're light green, dark green, large, small, all different varieties, but they're all in the same category, cycads. So the next of my favorite is a cannonball tree. Cannonball tree looks like this. This is our cannonball tree at Fairchild. The cannonball tree grows a fruit that is large and heavy and brown and round, looks like a cannonball. If the tree tried to grow the fruits high up in the branches, it wouldn't work because the fruit's too heavy. So it adapted by growing branches directly from the base. This is the base of the tree, the trunk. You can see where the bench is here. The branches are specialized to carry the flowers and then the fruit. The flowers are beautiful and extremely fragrant. When I drive by on my tram, if the wind's blowing in the right direction, it's like a perfume counter, for those of you who remember perfume counters in department stores. Later in the spring and into the summer, we will have cannonballs all around the base of the tree. So people ask me, are they edible? I have not tried one. I am told that when you open them, they smell awful. So I don't think anybody's looking to eat them. So another area in the garden, and I'm taking you on my route that I drive for my tour, the Montgomery palmatum. This is a very important feature of the original garden design. This was very important to David Fairchild and to Robert Montgomery. It is the largest concentration of palms. We have 500 plus palm species at Fairchild. There are over 2,000 palms in the world, and we have about 500 of them at Fairchild. We have a little sunken garden that's a limestone pool that's off the path, that's got a little waterfall, and it's landscaped with water plants. It's a beautiful place to sit and meditate. This is a picture of how you can see cycads versus palms. The cycads are the one closest to the ground. The palm is the one growing in back of it. I just wanted you to see the difference in the fronds. The palms are much smoother. And this is another one of my favorite features in the garden. The walkway, or the pathway in which I drive the tram, was created by pouring cement and then clipping fronds and leaves from the surrounding plants and placing them in the wet cement. And they stayed there till they dried up and blew away. I watched them building this a few years ago, and it's just beautiful. Instead of flat black asphalt, which it was, it's now this slightly pink, beautiful. You can see some of the fronds here. I try to get a good picture so you can see what it looks like. It just sort of makes me smile every time I drive by it. So a few other things. We have 2 greenhouses. We have a tropical fruit pavilion and a rare plant greenhouse. One of my favorite just random things in the garden is top left, this huge staghorn fern that hangs from a tree right opposite the greenhouses. I just think it's beautiful. We had a Chihuly exhibit in Fairchild about 10 years ago, and a very generous donor left some of them behind for us to grace the garden, and that's one of them. We have a statue of Marjorie. You all know Marjorie, I hope. Marjorie was a big influence on the establishment of the garden. Her mouth is open in the sculpture because she had a lot of opinions and a lot to say. And I'm told that's the truth. She was an influential woman in the 20s, 30s, and through the 60s in South Florida. She didn't give up. At a time when women didn't have a lot of influence in the culture, she kept on when she thought something was important. And one of her big causes was the Everglades, because at that time people were trying to get rid of the Everglades, clear it, drain the swamp, however you want to put it. And she came in and said, this isn't a swamp, this is actually a river. And she documented that geographically, the water drains from further up the peninsula of Florida down into the Everglades. So she wrote a book called River of Grass, which is what's on her lap there, in which she argued that we shouldn't be getting rid of the Everglades, that it's an important ecological feature, that it provides a buffer against storm surge. If you've got a huge wave coming at the land and you've cleared it, there's nothing to stop it from flooding. And then we call it a disaster, a flood. But if you'd left what was there, you might not be having a flood. So, a lot of other reasons. We get a lot of our fresh drinking water from the Everglades, and there are plants and animals that only live there. So because of her efforts, her and other people that worked with her, the Everglades is now a national park. And we're still arguing about how much we should invest in restoring what was destroyed before Marjorie and her colleagues came along, because the Everglades is a really important feature of this part of the country. One of the big exhibits that I love, that I urge you all to go to, is the indoor butterfly exhibit. We have 40+ species of indoor. They're indoor because they can't survive in our climate. They need consistent temperature and humidity. Twice a day they release butterflies that are bred at Fairchild. And there are tour guides as you go in who will tell you what to watch for, what to look for. It's a beautiful place. Then we go into the lakes area of the garden. These are some of the animals. It is a historic area called the Lowlands. You drive a whole 20 feet down. We have one hill in Fairchild. Our estate is very flat. So we go from the uplands, which we've just been in, what I've been showing you, to the area called the Lowlands. So there are 10 freshwater lakes that were dug by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s and 40s. It took them 11 years to dig them. They were freshwater when they were first dug. They are now brackish, which means slightly salty, because of sea level rise and saltwater incursion from Biscayne Bay, which is a big problem because the habitat is established as fresh. So we have crocodiles, we have many other wild animals, we have iguanas. I have to say a lot about iguanas, we all know. They eat plants. That's what we're doing at Fairchild. So we kind of coexist, have sort of a stalemate. Mangroves are an important feature of coastal areas around the world. They grow in salty or brackish water. They have the ability to remove salt. So they absorb water when they're in salt or brackish water, and they have the ability to take the salt out of the water and put it onto several leaves that turn yellow, not the whole plant, just certain leaves. And then the plant has the benefit of the fresh water. So they're one of the only plants in the world that can do that. So white settlers, when they came, tried to clear the swamp, drain the swamp, remove the mangroves. This would, if you've seen mangroves growing, would not be even possible. They are a thick welter of roots, such as you see, that's one of the areas in the garden that grows into the water. So they also create new land. As the water flows by, has little bits of salt, soil or silt. It collects around the roots and makes new land. And it provides a nursery area for small fish and crustaceans to raise their young and provide food for other fish and animals that live there. So it's a whole ecosystem, and when we try to remove it, again, one more time, my theme, we remove what was supposed to be there, and it doesn't usually go very well. It is illegal to harm a mangrove. You can get up to a $10,000 fine, and I had someone on my tour a few weeks ago who said he crashed his boat into some mangroves and he got a $10,000 fine. So the state, it takes it really seriously. So we have kapok trees. We have kapoks here on Key Biscayne. We have several that are quite beautiful. They're characterized by the folded roots in the top right picture. They have pink blossoms that come in the fall, and they have the big red ones. Like we have one of those, we have two of those on the island. There's one by the library and one along the village green. And the fruit has a hard exterior and a white fluffy substance inside that floats. So before we had synthetic versions of that, they were used for life preservers and pillows and anything that you wanted to float. What's very interesting is the folded base of the tree, the roots that keep the tree very stable. And this is a picture of a kapok on Key Biscayne that has thorns. It's a different variety. Most trees don't grow thorns on the trunk. So it's thought that in its native habitat, it's to keep animals from eating the bark. But it's quite an interesting feature of the plant. The pine rockland habitat used to cover most of the interior of the state of Florida. There is a geologic formation called the Miami Rock Ridge that extends from North Miami down through the Keys, and a habitat grew up on top of that. So it's a very rocky soil, rocky with limestone, and certain native plants evolved to live only there. So we have saw palmetto, coontie, as I mentioned, the only native cycad from Florida. It's unique to South Florida and the Bahamas. Problem is, once again, we are clearing the land, and we have 2% of the original pine rockland left in Florida. There's a lot of lobbying going on to stop one of the big box stores that wants to clear some of what's left to build a store. An example of what has not gone well. So there are pine rockland habitats in the Bahamas, in the Everglades, but in the state of Florida, besides the Everglades, a lot of it is gone. So there is a pine rockland area in Fairchild. Banyan trees, I hope everybody knows them. We have them here in the garden on the island. They're a symbol of fertility, life, and resurrection. It is a type of fig. It reproduces by the hairy roots, and you can see these were hairy roots at one time. They hit the ground and they create a new trunk. So the tree is invasive because it spreads. That's how it reproduces. It's beautiful, but people are discouraged from planting them because pretty soon that'll be all you'll have in your property is banyan. They grow up to 2 acres. They can cover up to 2 acres, and they're hard to get rid of. They have deep, wide roots. Okay, questions, comments, thoughts?
My favorite place in the world. Whenever I have company, I take them on tours. And you, by far, gave the best tour I've ever.
Thank you. Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you, Marshall.
Tell us again what day you tour.
Well, from now until May 20th, when I am leaving, I'm a snowbird, on Saturdays, from 11, 12, and 1 o'clock. If you want to come, and I'll save a seat for you because the trams only hold 14 people, and if you come to be on the 11 o'clock at 11 o'clock, you won't get on. So, especially on a weekend. Thank you.